Episode 2, Whispers in the Dark. The morning light barely filtered through the thick fog that clung to the town like a shroud, casting an eerie glow over the buildings and streets. Detective Eli Winters shook off the lingering chill from the night before and prepared to follow the few leads he had on Lila's disappearance. The whispered voice from the night echoed in his mind, faint, haunting, and unmistakably real. Determined to shake the remnants of the night's terror, he returned to the town square, where a few residents lingered, going about their morning routines. They regarded him with the same cautious, guarded expressions he'd seen the day before. He knew they were hiding something, that there was a reason the townspeople were so tight-lipped. If he could break through their fear, he might just find out what. Eli was drawn to an old woman hunched over in the corner of a small coffee shop, her gnarled fingers wrapped around a steaming cup. She looked at him as he entered, her gaze piercing, as if she knew what he was there for. Her eyes were clouded with age, yet there was a sharpness in them that unnerved him. "You're the new detective," she murmured, her voice a low rasp. "Come to solve what can't be solved." Eli took a seat across from her. "And you are?" Evelyn Marks." She paused, staring into her cup as if it held answers. "I knew Lila." Eli's pulse quickened. "What can you tell me about her?" Evelyn looked up, her gaze locking onto his. She was a sweet girl. Bright, curious, too curious for this place. I warned her to stay away from the woods, but she didn't listen. Kids never do. Eli leaned in, lowering his voice. "I heard whispers last night. A voice. A girl asking for help. Do you know anything about that?" The old woman's face paled, her hand shaking slightly. "You heard her, too." She looked around the room as if someone might overhear. "There are those in this town who've heard the same thing. The children especially, though they never speak of it. The voice has been here long before Lila disappeared, long before I was born." Eli frowned, trying to make sense of her words. "Are you saying there's something supernatural here?" Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "I don't pretend to understand it, detective. All I know is that there's something out there in the woods. A darkness. It calls to people, especially those who don't belong here." A chill ran through Eli as her words settled over him. She leaned closer, her gaze intense. "If you value your life, you'll leave this place. Whatever brought you here, whatever you think you'll find, it's not worth the price." But Eli wasn't one to scare easily. He nodded, thanked her, and left the coffee shop, her warning still echoing in his mind. Determined to find more concrete answers, Eli made his way toward the town's small library. He figured if there were records of disappearances, folklore, or any unusual history, they might be preserved here. The library was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of old paper and dust. The librarian, a wiry man named George, gave Eli a wary glance as he entered, but pointed him toward the archive room without a word. As Eli sifted through the files, he noticed a disturbing pattern. The disappearances dated back over a century, and each one was eerily similar. People would vanish without a trace, often after being last seen near the Black Hollow Woods. But there was something else. Every few decades, there was a note in the town ledger about a cleansing ritual performed by the townspeople, an attempt to ward off the darkness in the woods. Eli found an old, yellowed document detailing one such ritual, performed about 25 years ago, led by none other than Evelyn Marks. It described the gathering of townsfolk at the edge of the woods, their chanting and offerings meant to appease the spirit that lurks. But the results of the ritual were vague, merely ending with the words, "and so the shadows receded, for a time." A chill ran down Eli's spine. Whatever they had tried to appease hadn't been placated. It seemed to have only grown stronger. That night, back in his room, Eli lay awake, his mind racing with the information he'd uncovered. He couldn't ignore the growing sense of dread in the pit of his stomach, the feeling that something was watching him, waiting for him to make a mistake. Around midnight, he heard it again, the scratching. It was closer this time, louder, more insistent, as if whatever was making the sound had moved inside the walls. He sat up, straining to listen, his breath shallow. The scratching grew louder, then stopped abruptly. A soft voice floated through the room, so faint he thought he might be imagining it. "Help me." Eli felt his blood turn cold. He rose from the bed, his heart pounding, and walked over to the wall, pressing his ear against it. The whispering grew louder, the voice growing more desperate. "Please, help me," he pulled back, his mind racing. If there was someone trapped, someone alive, he couldn't ignore it. He grabbed his flashlight, slipped into the hallway, and made his way toward the basement, where he suspected the sounds might be originating. The inn was silent, the halls dark and empty as he descended the stairs, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. The basement door creaked as he opened it, revealing a narrow staircase that led into pitch-black darkness. He switched on his flashlight, illuminating the stone walls lined with old, rotting shelves and cobwebs. The air was thick, damp, and filled with the smell of decay. As he reached the bottom of the stairs, his flashlight beam caught something on the far wall, scratches, hundreds of them, covering nearly every inch of the surface. They were deep and jagged, as if made by someone in sheer desperation. Eli felt a cold sweat break out as he approached the wall, his mind racing with images of someone trapped down here, scratching at the walls in a futile attempt to escape. And then, he saw it, a small, tattered ribbon, pale pink and frayed, dangling from a nail in the wall. It looked like it had been there for years, untouched. He reached out and took it in his hand, feeling an inexplicable wave of sadness and fear wash over him. He knew, somehow, that this ribbon had belonged to Lila. Suddenly, the scratching started again, louder, more frenzied, coming from behind the wall. Eli stumbled back, his flashlight flickering as the sound grew louder, closer as if whatever was on the other side was trying to break through. The light flickered again, then went out entirely, plunging him into darkness. He fumbled with the flashlight, heart racing, when he heard the voice again, right next to him. "Help me." The whisper was filled with pain, despair, and something else, a hunger. He spun around, trying to locate the source of the voice, but all he could see was darkness. The scratching continued, now echoing through the basement, filling the air with a sense of growing dread. And then, the voice spoke again, this time louder, almost a scream. "You can't leave." Eli stumbled backward, his hands groping for the staircase, but it was gone. The room seemed to stretch, warping around him, the walls pressing in closer as the darkness thickened. He could feel the presence around him, something ancient, malevolent, something that had been waiting. In the faint light of the dying flashlight, he saw a shape, a shadow with eyes, hollow and filled with a deep, unending darkness. It moved toward him, reaching out with skeletal fingers, as the walls closed in around him. He closed his eyes, bracing himself, whispering a silent prayer as the darkness swallowed him whole. Eli awoke with a start, back in his room at the inn, drenched in sweat. He looked around, disoriented, his heart pounding as he tried to make sense of what had happened. The basement, the scratching, the voice, all of it felt real, yet here he was, safe in his bed. On the nightstand beside him lay the pink ribbon. It was no dream. And as he lay back, trying to calm himself, he heard it again, the faint, desperate whisper that would haunt him for nights to come. "Help me." End of episode 2.